In the previous video, we had a look at duplicate values in the dataset. We dealt with that, we deleted it, and before that, we had a look at how we dealt with missing values. So please have a look at those videos to get a sense of where we are in the analysis of the data for test playing cricketers since 1992 for the South African Proteas. In this video, we're going to continue with this pre-processing, and we are going to look at the particular column names. Are the names of the columns in the data frame a true reflection of the actual content, the actual values in the respective columns? When we look at the data, browse up a little bit and have a look at what we have up here. If you look at the player value, the first thing that I pick up is it doesn't make sense that under player you have the initial as well as the surname. So what would be ideal is if we could split the initial into one column and the surname into another column. Then we can order the data either according to initial alphabetically or alphabetically according to the surname. Usually when surnames are available, we order the data according to the alphabetical order of the surnames. So it makes sense to do this. What we're going to do now is we're going to go down to the next line of code. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask Python to split the player column. And when I split the player column, I'm going to ask it to create two new columns called firstly initial and secondly surname. So wherever the split happens, the first part of the split will go to the initial and the second part of the split will go to the surname. You can see now, thank goodness, if you look at the data, and if we can even go up a bit, if you look at the surnames and the names in the player column, thank goodness for us, all the initials don't have a spacing between them. So the initials are right next to each other with no space between them. For example, AA, Alan Donald, Alan Anthony Dollal, Abraham Benjamin de Villiers. So there's no space between the A and B. If there was, we would have to use different code. What Python did was it split the player between the initial, the space between the initial and the surname. So in other words, it split AB de Villiers between AB and de. It split Alan Donald between AA and Donald. It split Gary Kirsten between G and Kirsten. It split Gerald Coetzee between the G and the Coetzee. What it then did was it assigned them into respective columns. But now notice over here, there is an error part. And the error part says columns must be the same length as key. Now, what does that mean? What it means is, if you go look up top here, you can see there are now 4 new columns added. So there are 123 rows, but 4 new columns have been added. Now, why would there be 4 new columns? The instruction here was to split the name at the initial, split the initial into one column, and then wherever the space is just after the initial, whatever is after that is then in the next column. But now the instruction was that it must be split at the first initial and it must be split wherever there is an open space. For example, look at Z de Bruin, Zander de Bruin. It split it after the Z, Zander, but then it also split it after de. So it created another column. The same with AB de Villiers. It split it after AB and it split it after de. So it created another column. Now there are certain cricketers like Rassie van der Dussen. It would split his initial. Van would be in another column. De would be in another column. Dussen would be in another column. That's 4 columns. 4 columns that are created. Hence this 4 columns. And this is a problem. So what we need to do is we need to tell Python to split it. But what we've added here is this n+1. We're also telling the new column to split the names, but that the original column, player, must be dropped. So if you look at the data, you'll see over here that right at the end, Python puts the new columns that are added at the end of the data frame. There is a new column, initial, but notice now, surname, de Villiers. The entire surname is under that column surname. And the difference in the code, notice the difference in the code, this part over here, compared to up here. You're actually telling it to split it at the first spacing, where up top here, this line 87, split it at all the spacing. So now we have the split player surname and initial in 2 separate columns. Let's just run ahead the top 5, the first 5, and you can see it's again right at the end here, which is not where we want it to be. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to ask Python to move those 2 columns that we created to the beginning. And this is the code of here. So I'm going to extract those last 2 columns. I'm going to drop them from their current positions. And then I'm going to move them to the beginning of the data frame using this code over here. Here you can see initial surname is right at the beginning of the data frame, which is great because now we can order this whole data frame according to initials, which it currently is, sorted by, or we can order it according to, or sort it according to the alphabetical order of the surnames. We have a lot more discretion with regards to that now. So now the question becomes, why are there 29 columns where before the split there were 30 columns? Should it not be 31? The answer is no, there should not be 31, because remember, you added 2 new columns, but you dropped 1 column. You dropped the player column. That's important. So keep thinking about your data. Don't just run code and think that the data will magically turn out the way you expect it to turn out. No, that's not how it works. So constantly check and reason and think logically about what you're doing and think about how that influences your data at the end of the day. So let's look at the top 5 there. Now we can see, great, it's exactly like you wanted it to be. Another interesting aspect of the columns, if you look at span, there are 2 numbers there. For Andre now, you've got 2001, 2008. What does that mean? What does it mean 2001, 2008? Why are there 2 numbers? Is it 2 numbers that are separate, or is it 1 number that just has a space between them, which is incorrect? Well, no. We know, I know, you know, that what those numbers mean are the years that this particular cricketer, or each respective cricketer, played for South Africa. So we know that Andre Nel played for the Proteas between 2001 and 2008. So it'll be nice, it'll make sense if we hyphenate those years. So 2001 hyphen 2008, and we do that for every single one. But before we do that, let's first be logical about this. If we analyze the data and we look at the span, we can see what years they played for the Proteas, but we don't see, there's no column that shows how many years they played for South Africa. We can see how many matches they played for South Africa. Andre Nel played 36 matches for South Africa, but we don't know for how many years he played those 36 matches. For this reason, a good idea will be to determine the number of years he played for South Africa and add it as a new column. How do we do that? Well, simply, we take the last year that a respective cricketer played for South Africa and we subtract when he started. That should give us, or that will give us, the number of years he played for South Africa. So before we hyphenate the span column, let's first calculate how many years each cricketer played for South Africa and then add that in a new column. Now what we're going to do is we're going to split the span column and we're going to convert the years to integers, because we have to convert it to integers to enable us to analyze the data. And then we're going to calculate the difference and add a new column. And the column's name is going to be active years. So the code is run because 92 shows up there. There's no error and there's no output. So we know it's done in the background. Now let's look at the first 5 entries. So we can see now that the initial and surname from the previous lines of code, nothing has happened to span, but there's also no active years. Now where's that? Remember, when a new column is added, it's always at the end. There are active years. Andre Nel, 2008, he ended his career and he started in 2001. Now you might say the difference between that is 7. In the code of a year, the end year minus the start year plus 1. I added 1 because remember, if he started in 2001, it's 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 years. But if I subtract 2001 from 2008, I only get 7 years. But he actually played 8 years. So you've got to add 1. So that means he has 8 active years as a cricketer for the Proteas. Now, of course, what we need to do, the same as above, we want to move that active years to next to span because it makes sense that it's there. So let's run this code over here. And then you can see active years is next to span. So span index, again, I'm using that get.loc function next to span. And I'm telling it to insert 1 plus, in other words, to the right, active years next to the span. And then I'm going to print this. And as you can see, active years is there next to span. Great. So now we've got another very useful column in terms of our data analysis. We don't only know when they played for South Africa, we also know how many years they played for South Africa. So you might want to have interesting calculations where you can work out, for example, the average number of matches played per year as a Protea. You can do that now, where previously you couldn't do that. Now, let's add the hyphen to the span column. Replace the space with a hyphen in the span column using, again, the .loc, Shift Enter. The code is run. There's no error. There's no output, so we know that it's done in the background. Let's look at the first 5 entries. And then you can see we've now added a hyphen to the span column. Great. In this video, therefore, what we did was we calculated the number of active years that these respective cricketers have been playing for South Africa. We've added that column. We've added a hyphen to a particular column. And we've also split the initial and the surname for every respective cricketer and created new columns for respectively the initial and the surname. In the next video, we will be looking at how we deal with outliers in the data.